Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. This week we have a special guest with us, Chris Delaney. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't believe a year has gone by.
I know.
Horrifying, really. But
I know. Time flies when you're having fun,
it
right?
Does. It actually does.
We're having Chris back again. He was here with us last year at the Outdoor Farm Show, and we were speaking on his expertise then, and we're going to be speaking about it this week as well. And the episode that we're recording right now is building 100-year wealth on the farm.
Good.
So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent.
Let's do this.
Then let's dive right in. Actually, before we dive right in, can you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and your experience?
Sure. So I am by training a lawyer. I was called to the bar here in Ontario in 1991. Had my own practice for a few years after having done some litigation. Then I worked for 15 years prior to last summer with the Wealth Management Services divisions of Canada's two largest banks and their brokerages. And we were providing estate planning and business succession planning for their clients, particularly their high net worth and ultra high net worth clients. And then last summer, right around the time we recorded that show, I had started a new career. I wrote a book. I do speaking associated with that book. I'm writing a second book right now, and I do teaching at the local college here as well on finance, in the finance area as well, so risk management,
okay,
financial planning. So this all right in the wheelhouse.
You are a busy guy.
Yeah,
busy
I
guy.
like to be. Yeah, keeps me off the streets.
Yeah, keeps you out of trouble, right?
Yes, well.
Well, that's another episode. Okay, so when you say building 100-year wealth,
yeah,
that is some of the knowledge that comes out of your book, your field of expertise. What does that mean for somebody sitting at home, our farming audience?
Yeah.
What would building 100-year wealth on a farm mean? What does that mean?
Okay. Well, primarily that's a mindset. Looking at wealth as being an intergenerational opportunity, as well as an obligation and a responsibility from 1 to 4 generations. I mean, let's say we live 100 years. A female born today probably has an expected lifespan, actuarially speaking, of 92 years. So
excellent.
Males probably, yeah, that's good for you.
Yeah,
right?
I like that. Yeah.
I'm not so fortunate,
no.
But 85, 86 for a male being born today. So 100-year wealth is really intended to be a mindset about taking a full life's view of your wealth planning and taking it from the point of its generation or creation, if that was with you, all the way through to its transition to a third, maybe even a fourth generation, and having ownership for that all along the way. And it's a different mindset because most estate planning, most business succession planning, most farm transition planning tends to look at it as this generation to that generation.
Yeah.
And that is much more transactional. It's misses opportunities for planning for the wealth that is inherent in the family that isn't financial or enterprise values. So, for example, in my book, I talk about FISH, which is, it's an acronym, FISH, for financial, intellectual, social, and human capital inside a family.
Okay.
Most of the planning that we do, both as consumers of planning, so farmers who are looking at putting together an estate plan or a succession plan, but also advisors who are working with those clients. They're usually looking at the assets. They don't spend a lot of time looking at who the assets are for. We tend to plan for the assets. And most of the body of research, most of the body, I think, of anecdotal experience in this space suggests that for wealth to be able to last 100 years, to get to that mindset, you have to have come to the conclusion or the acceptance that our financial and enterprise wealth, so the value of the farm itself, exists for the promulgation of the capital inside the family that is the intellectual capital, so what you know as a family, the social capital that you have, so what it means to be the Smith family and the community that you're in and investing in that, and the human capital. Every individual in your family has something to offer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to the farm, but it often is. And that we use our financial assets and we use the leverage we can take off of our enterprise, the farm itself, to invest in those assets. And when we do that, we're able to create wealth that moves from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. And what we're avoiding there, and I know you've heard about this, we talked about this last year, is shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah.
Which is basically the paradigm of experience that the first generation or a generation creates the wealth, the second generation stewards that wealth, and the third generation squanders the wealth, right? If you view your wealth and you view your farm succession planning through a 100-year lens, each generation should be inculcated with the skills they need to be a creation generation, and a stewarding generation. And we work against those squandering tendencies as much as we can.
Okay.
So it's a mindset. 100-year wealth is really a mindset. And it's to avoid shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The idea is not to trap capital so that nothing can be done with it for 100 years. It's to plan with the capital so that it grows and can support the needs of the family and everything that it does for 100 years. And that's just a rather arbitrary increment. It's a nice long time, and it tends to approximate a maximum lifespan that some of us might have as well. So I think it's a bit of a metaphor for how we spend our life. We should spend our life thinking about our wealth as being something that is a responsibility for all of our adult lives. So that's how I tend to view it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that might be different. There might be longer term thinkers. I would imagine that's different personalities too, right?
Absolutely.
That would think a little bit different. More people are short term, some are longer term, but that's a neat way of thinking about it too, because as we talk about transition planning and get farmers moving towards that, thinking, I mean, so often we're thinking in crop years or one calving year, right? For farmers, we're so busy planning for that year and what needs to happen. I mean, and a year's a nice chunk, but that's not how much bandwidth is left to be thinking about 100-year wealth, and that's really neat. I mean, I wonder how many people out there spend much time thinking further than my children are going to take over.
Well, and you raise a really interesting point. It's not just, and that is how most people look at it. And so you say bandwidth. They have enough bandwidth to think, I need to get this to my kids, and that's as far as I need to think about it.
Yeah.
And it's their problem, right? But there's a lot we can do to protect that wealth for a lot of different reasons that you might have for wanting to protect that wealth. If we think of protecting it for the grandchildren, protecting it for the great-grandchildren, there's so many different ways to view the planning. And when you're thinking of it as 100 years, and that's arbitrary, if you're thinking of it as being long-term, you start to look at some of the tactics with a little bit more of an open mind. So you mentioned, and I thought that was really a good metaphor, we tend to view it in crop cycles. A lot of retirement planning in Canada has traditionally been based on sort of 1950s theories on wealth. So, there's a reason why people think to retire at 65, and that a lot of that has to do with the fact that people didn't live past 65. So, you retire, you have enough money to get to your 65th birthday, and conveniently for everyone, you die a couple of years later, right? And that planning, that mindset also affects the advisors we work with. So they often will do wills that just think to their kids, because the idea really is, I don't want to rule from the grave. it's their problem. I'll pass it off to them. They can do what they want with it.
Okay.
But so much wealth. The boomer generation, and farmers are in that generation as well. They are dealing with capital that will manifestly exceed their needs many times over. It's not a retirement issue really anymore. It is a capital preservation issue. And so greater issues greater concerns, greater planning considerations start to flow into it. And a lot of the infrastructure around planning, so accounting and legal, still stuck in that 1950s mentality where, get it to your kids, you wash your hands of it after you die. What they want to do with it, they can do with it. But there's so much that we can do as parents and as grandparents to make sure that we give the optimal opportunity to that wealth to do everything it can for the intellectual, social, and human constituents of their family wealth. So we're breaking mindsets about short-term cycles and thinking of the planning cycle as a longer cycle, that it brings in other people's, your children's, your grandchildren's lives, their concerns, their needs, and thinking long-term with it that way. There's so much more that we can do. And when we do that, we start to be, so another mindset, you've probably bumped into this with some of your other speakers. I've seen some of your podcasts, I think they've said this, then you begin to switch. When you think long-term with the wealth, whether it's a farm or just liquidity, you begin to develop more of an abundance mindset. You start to think about what it can do instead of the things that are a more scarcity mindset, right? Like, I only have this much, and so I'm going to close myself around it. And you look at it as a burden rather than an opportunity. And once you start to take a 100-year mindset, you begin to see things more abundantly, and then you start to look at things from a planning perspective more as opportunities to do good inside your family dynamic network, dynamic family network, I should say. And the planning changes. Like, over the years, I've worked with a lot of clients, and they're frightened. They're very frightened in their planning. They're worried about what their wealth will do to their kids and to their grandkids. Right? Instead of looking at it and saying, what can it do for them? And I think, at least in part, adopting a long-term mindset begins to change the switches and the synapses on that a little bit, and you make that move from fearing the outcomes of the planning to being excited about the potential of the planning as well. So that's another reason you might want to look at 100-year planning. And it's your fault I got off on that tangent, because you said we look at it in terms of crop cycles and things like that. So do the people we work with. They do too. Let's get the will done, on to the next one. Let's get the taxes finished in this year, on to the next tax year, right? And then those are just two examples. They're busy. It's hard, but we got to be prepared to be advocates for our planning and tease it out longer and find the message that we want to send for the long term.
Okay, that is excellent. So how can we get into some hows? How do farm families, how do you build a 100-year wealth? That's a big one.
That is a big one. And
I just start with the big questions, just so you know.
Well, and you say...
Just so you know, I dive right in.
Just dive right in.
Yeah.
You might as well. Let's get it over with.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about this earlier as we were preparing. I think, first of all, you got to accept that there's going to be some hard work associated with this. And there's going to be some spaces you're going to have to go that aren't that comfortable. There may be issues in your family that it's a little more convenient to ignore in some of the planning, and you can get by with that. But if you really want to do 100-year planning, or you want to do purposeful planning, which is another way to say that, you're going to have to be prepared to tackle some of those issues, whatever they might be, in some way. You're going to have to deal with some of the unpleasantness. So getting started really is about getting started is that's what you should do. Don't procrastinate. And most people procrastinate out of fear. They're afraid of the outcome of something.
Yes.
They're intelligent. They have a tremendous amount of experience. They have the net worth to be able to do the type of planning, but they're afraid of something. And usually it's how it's going to be perceived and received by their family, right?
Yes.
And we love our families. We don't want them to be upset with us. So they stop planning and they do nothing. And procrastination is a time thief, but it's also an opportunity thief. It takes away opportunities that might exist to plan around, through, or over what's making you afraid. So getting started is really, really important. And I know that sounds super cliche, but putting your head into the sand is not a good idea. And so I would recommend, you mentioned a coach or someone like that. Finding someone who will take your hand, an advisor who will take your hand and walk with you all the way through what you need to do. Whether it's the tax planning, the family dynamics planning, maybe you need a mediator, you know, all the possible issues that are going to come up. Someone will help you through that bramble bush and that tangle and stay with you, almost like a coach all the way through. So if you can find maybe like a mentor or someone or a coach, you know, somebody or just somebody who's going to come with you all the way through. I come from the legal background, and a lot of the legal work that we do on a file is transactional, right? It has a beginning and an end. If you've got a lawyer who will hold your hand and take you through from conceptualizing the plan and then taking it all the way through to the end, including all the little eddies and nooks and crannies you need to go, that's amazing. Maybe the accountant's the one who does that. So you want to find somewhere in your advisory circle, or if you have to add to it, be prepared to go add to it, somebody who can help you out with that and take you all the way through. There are 5, so the starting point, that's a mindset thing, is appreciating, okay, I've got to do this, I want to do this, I want to have 100-year wealth, and what that actually forces you to do is to become an advocate for your own planning over time. Okay. And that's important, because when you do get derailed, when you do get delayed, when you are frustrated maybe by advice that you're getting or delays that you're experiencing, you keep going because it's important to you. So where that starts, how you become an advocate for your own planning.
Can I jump in there really quick? Okay, I like to do the 101 for dummies here, and I like stories and putting myself in a situation, okay?
Sure.
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding you. So when we're talking about wealth, a lot of people are at home. Okay, I'm thinking of many, many farm families, taking a step back, that I know of, that have the farm.
Yeah.
Everything's invested in the farm. There may be children working on the farm. They own lots of land. Let's say myself and my husband are in the Woodstock area here, okay? Mm-hmm. We're dairy farmers. Mm-hmm. And because the price of land is so high out here,
it is.
We're sitting on a $20 million dairy farm, okay? Right. So at this point, it's myself, my husband, I'm a little bit older than I am right now because I have older children, right. And let's say we have grandchildren, okay? And I know the farm is here. We're talking about making sure that what we've built here, this $20 million farm, mm-hmm. continues on longer. So I just want to make sure that I'm doing the 101 for the dummy right here and going, so paint the picture. Where does the wealth planning and the succession planning, is this all pieces of a puzzle? Is it all one and the same?
It's pieces of a big puzzle.
Okay.
So
I'm throwing you a curveball because,
that's okay.
You know, it's just trying to put myself in farmers' shoes. There's so many good ideas out there. Sometimes, where does Tracy, the dairy farmer that just wants to farm?
You're right.
Where do I even start? I know I have all this, yep. And my goodness, I know I need to do something. Sure. My kids are probably bugging me. My grandkids are getting up there in age.
Sure.
I know I need to get this farm to the next generations.
Yeah.
And the wealth. So I want to clarify that a little bit, and sorry for throwing a curveball.
No, it's not really a curve, because I think that is the central, you know, whether it's 20 million, 40 million, 2 million, the issue is the same. Yes. All the time. You have this enterprise, and what I often will refer to it, you know, we'll look at it as a system. And so you've got the business, then you've got the family, and then you've got the ownership. Okay. And if we look at those as being 3 pools of separate types of planning that can go on, different types of interests, and very often different family members or different third parties are involved in those circles. if we pull those circles apart a little bit from a planning perspective and say, okay, what do we want to have happen with the family? What has to happen with the family? So that's usually a goals-based, values-based exercise. So that's a good starting point. And I like to suggest to the people that read the book and to the people that come up and chat with me afterwards, you want to start from a shared position if you can. What does everyone agree must happen from this planning? Or an alternative way to look at it, or an additional way to look at it is actually a better way to put it. What can't happen? Of all the planning we do, what can't happen? So, for example, if you've got the $20 million farm here in the Woodstock area, as a family you may decide that no matter what happens with the planning associated with the farm itself, which is the asset, our family has to be able to be intact, has to be able to have Christmas together.
Nice.
We can't isolate two people who are not going to be on the farm or not going to be owners of the farm simply because of their status there. We have to make sure that at the end of the day, the family functions. Now, you may decide that is not the concern, and that's fine, but that has to be defined as well.
The family bubble.
What does the family bubble look like?
Okay.
And the family bubble is really important because it's growing. And the dynamics associated with that are changing all the time. So the grandchildren you referred to begin to go away to Guelph University, and they come back with all this knowledge that they're raring to pump into the business. How do we build that? How do we give them a space and a voice at the table? Or they come back with a spouse, and how do we deal with that person? How do we integrate that person? And so once you've identified the common values that you might share, which you will use to build towards shared goals and shared objectives, you also want to make sure you understand what the communication scheme is going to be on a lot of this as well. Okay. So for each of the circles of that three-circle model, you have to have an authentic form of communication. So I always joke that most families evolve from the golden rule into something else, and the golden rule is whoever has the gold makes the rules. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So
that's a good one.
If that's mom and dad.
Yeah.
That next generation. Say you have 3 children and they all marry, and so now you go from 2 to 8 potential decision makers, because they may not be specifically decision makers yet, but they're stakeholders because the decisions will affect them.
Yeah.
So they're involved. And that family needs to have an understanding of how that's going to happen as well. So governance and communication for each of the 3 circles. So the 3 circles were family, ownership of the enterprise, and then the management of the enterprise. And there are going to be family members. Like there might be a spouse of a child who's in the family by the definition that you've selected as a family for what family means, but they don't work on the farm at all. They have a job, in the city, or they're doing, they're a lawyer or something like that, and they're not an owner. So they're only in one of the 3 circles, but these 3 circles all overlap each other. And we have to be prepared to manage the communication and the governance inside each of those 3 circles where they are. Okay. So they might be different. They might be very different decision-making models that are in there, and that kind of goes to developing. For someone who's out there thinking, where do I start? You can start anywhere in there, really, but the family usually is a pretty good place to start because that really is what it's about. It's a family business, and farming is unique that way because there's the closest corollary I can find sometimes to an asset in a non-farm setting is a cottage, because it is just filled with emotion and legacy, and it also generates opportunities for people. Not necessarily, a cottage doesn't generate employment opportunities, but it generates recreational opportunities, and they're very similar. And it's not basic, divide and just split it up to those that use it. There's emotion attached in it. And that's what we've got to be prepared to do. That's what you've got to be prepared to do, is to recognize that this is a dynamic model, that there's a change in the family, a divorce, or somebody chooses not to join the business. is going to cause, that little wave over in the pool on the family side or on the ownership side is going to cause a tsunami on some other side of that integrated the three circles of the business.
Absolutely.
So, and once we understand that there's an integration that is there, then we can begin to spend time putting together decision-making and communication that acknowledges that and builds boundaries around that a little bit. And what that does, what I've experienced over the years doing some of this work, is that takes away the fear.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that there's not going to be an argument. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be a disagreeable conversation at Thanksgiving. But it does mean that you've made the effort to say, okay, if we have that disagreeable conversation, we have a forum where we want to do it, we understand the rules around how we're going to communicate our disagreement, and there will be a methodology to settling the issue at the end of the discussion.
Okay.
Instead of just letting it burst out and
Jerry Springer?
right, Springer.
Jerry Springer at Thanksgiving?
You don't want that.
No.
Most people don't want that. I have met the odd person who I think secretly did want that, but most people
Could
don't
be entertaining,
want that.
but no, we don't want it.
It's a story.
Not at our own family
Certainly
Thanksgiving,
not.
no. Okay.
So
the family, the business, and then the wealth bubble.
And that
right?
So going back to your question, that gives you a way to frame starting points. Because it's a big, muddled, tangled mess. Every family business is. But if we begin to untangle it a little bit, that helps us with more focused starting points as well. In terms of advisors that can help you with that, obviously lawyers do law, and so they do agreements and give advice on the expected legal implications. Tax advisors can give you the tax advice on something. But a lot of times what we're really talking about here is family. It's more relational than anything else. So sometimes you might want to work with a business consultant that's got some experience with mediation, or is a family enterprise advisor, or someone who's done some training in family dynamics. And one of the reasons, the best example I can give you is that then you can have a family meeting as the parent, so it's a family meeting, not a business meeting. And when you say something, you're a participant. You're not managing the meeting.
Okay.
And somebody else can help regulate and curate the meeting a little bit for you, so that you can be mom or you can be dad. And having that person involved is extremely helpful, because that helps to make sure that the message that is coming from you isn't misinterpreted on the other side of the equation, right? So if you were in a business meeting and you say something about one of the children, are they going to hear that as a child? Are you speaking to them as a parent? Or are you speaking to them as an owner of the business? And it sounds like there shouldn't be a difference, but there actually are substantial differences. I'd be prepared to take criticism from a manager. But if that manager also happens to be my mother,
Is there ever a separation? That's challenging.
It takes work. It takes effort to build some capacity to do that, and that goes back to that mindset.
Family, business, separate.
Right, family, business, and then ownership. And they all have different, very different priorities. They have different timelines. They often have different parties that are involved in each of those. Like you may have a non-family person working on the farm that may or may not have some ownership, but who is a critical part of the success of the, how do we plan for their input as well?
And they're part of that business bubble,
they're
right?
part of the business. Yeah.
Okay, and thanks for letting me take us back there, because you've shared that model with me before.
Yeah.
And again, I always throw myself under the bus and wanting to make sure that I understand, because when we're talking about wealth, and correct me if I'm wrong, many farm families, our wealth is in our land, in our machinery.
Illiquid.
So I know we should have some investments and some other stuff going on here. That's likely the case for some and not for others. But when we're talking about building 100-year wealth, doesn't a lot of that come to me when I hear that, Chris? I hear succession planning.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, we're talking about succession planning.
I wanted to make sure.
Or transition planning is actually.
Oh, yes, right.
I'm sure someone else has said that before.
They're changing the wording on me.
We are changing the wording.
And I'm going to literally have to get like a swear jar. And every time I say succession, I'm going to have to put a quarter in and I'm going to be rich at the end.
Well, because when you think succession, you often think winners and losers,
yes.
right? Whereas
yes.
transition is acknowledging that there's a change occurring, but there's changes in decision making, changes in fortunes in terms of who's getting wealth and who's not getting wealth, but there's also changes in relationships to that wealth as well.
So when you're talking about wealth in the context of a family farm, can you share a little bit more on that?
So I view family wealth, and the book deals with family wealth in its totality. So there's intellectual, social, and human capital, all part of the wealth of a family. But as a practical matter, we tend to do most of our succession and transition planning. We call it transition planning now because that takes away the winner and loser component of that and makes it more acknowledging change, and that change has implications. And what are those implications going to be, and how much do we want to manage those implications? What is the wealth for a farm family? Well, it's going to include all those things, but it also includes the actual real estate and the business entity itself. And transition planning for that is tricky because it's illiquid. The components usually have to be kept together to remain viable.
Yeah.
And it's providing incomes for one or probably multiple components of the family. This is why the planning is so important and shouldn't just be left until the very last minute. You want to make sure that you can seize every opportunity out of that particular wealth generating paradigm so that you can get other opportunities out. So maybe you have some children that don't want to be, or a child that doesn't want to be on the farm. How do we make that transition plan? Well, sometimes people just throw away the word, the phrase fair doesn't necessarily mean equal, and that's risky. That's really risky.
Yeah, that's a loaded one.
That's a loaded one, and nobody spends enough time on that. Fair to who? Equal to me means equal.
Yeah.
Dollar value is equal, just like at Christmas, right? It's equal. And fair is a matter of perspective. What is fair to you isn't necessarily fair to the recipient of what you thought was fair. So we have to be prepared to communicate about that, which is also hard work. So getting back to the family's wealth, there's a wealth of opportunities in there. And that's why you want to start early. And you have to think a little bit, so a lot of farm planning is tax driven. There's no question about that. The Income Tax Act contains a variety of opportunities for farmers that are unique to that particular economic space that actually begin to drive the planning, the rollovers and things like that. But you're actually punting the ball down the field every time. A lot of those issues aren't going away. They're going to come back. And in the future, a lot of those issues are going to become very more encased in concrete, right? Mm-hmm. Dealing with it when it's new and supple is much, much easier. So, for example, if you are in your 30s now and you're farming, you might want to look at building a life insurance policy that has some value in it. Yes, it takes cash flow away from deployment on the farm, and that's a hard decision, but you are looking at 100-year planning, and you are looking at developing opportunities for every element of that structure that is your family tree. Maybe that means that you've got to start to carve off some wealth to put into investments in order to achieve that. So you've got to broaden your advisor base, and you've got to broaden the messages that you're receiving as well. The wealth has potential, and you want to make sure that you carve out over time every possible bit of planning potential that it provides. The other area, so only about half of adult Canadians have a will, which is horrifying. This was an Ipsos read that was poll that was done last year. Another 16% have wills that are, so old that they self-report that they're irrelevant. So about 66% of adult Canadians have a non-functional estate plan. They either don't have it or it's out of date. And there are reasons for that. It's fear, it's thinking they don't have enough wealth, it's thinking that things will sort themselves out on their own, which they won't. Those problems are tackled earlier, better than they're tackled later. So life insurance is better purchased when you're younger, I'm not selling life insurance, but as a solution to a problem, it's better purchased when you're younger versus older. Doing family governance and decision making and having shareholders agreements and will plans that are shared and having a process associated with that is done better younger than it is done later. Because we harden into some of our optics and some of our perspectives. Start building it sooner. And that makes the wealth more malleable and allows you to plan for longer terms and different outcomes as well. So again, I know that's a bit of a globby answer, but the reality is that the wealth of a farm family is not just the farm. It's not just the investments that they might have. It's also the people that they have. It's what they know as farmers. I mean, if you're a successful farmer, you've probably beaten the odds. You know something about farming. And so you want to make sure you transmit that wealth as well. Too. That's an intellectual capital that you want to share.
And I don't think people think of that.
They don't. It's like you're born with it. You're not. No, it's just like non-farm entrepreneurs. They've beaten the odds. Like 80% of startups fail. Yeah. So if you've survived, and if you're a farmer and you've survived, you've beaten the odds.
Okay.
But that's knowledge and that's family capital as well. So you can begin to invest in that as well. So I always advocate for looking at the broader scope of what your family's wealth is, including the enterprise capital as well, and investing, taking what the enterprise capital generates, so the income off the farm, or a piece of it, and investing in all the other pieces as well. Because if they grow together, what you'll find is that everyone will be able to better think long term, everyone will be better able to work together, and the planning will become more robust and more supple to deal with the challenges that the family will face.
Okay.
So I'm taking really a long-term view and going from planning, whether it's transition planning or estate planning, to being an event, to being a process. And it's something you do through it's your obligation to do it. It's your responsibility, I guess, to manage that through your entire life.
I'm trying to get myself in Farmer Tracy's shoes and how that would make me think a little bit different. And you've given me some ideas already where I am X many years old, let's say, and I have
20?
Children. 29 and staying put.
Yeah. Well, not yet.
No, sorry, 29's a few years off yet.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. So we have, going back, whatever scenario you're in, if we're taking a longer term look at it, I guess it's just being a little bit more thoughtful, a little more business oriented, a little less now where, yeah, darn it, I don't want to take that money away from the farm to put it into, and again, we're not selling anything here, we're working on ideas and different thought processes, but where I want to keep all that money and buy more cows and buy more land or whatever it is, maybe we're looking at taking a little bit of that and doing a policy over here.
Sure.
Because, and again, guys, I'm not advising here, but I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes and thinking a little bit different than I would.
Yeah.
And even sometimes as a business owner, I'm so busy doing, and I think we could be so busy farming that we forget to teach and mentor and bring in.
Yes.
And if we look at sometimes where transition planning goes wrong in previous generations, Grandpa just kept those reins and Dad just worked, and the knowledge wasn't passed down. Now all of a sudden Grandpa or Dad's gone and here's this farm. And that next generation that's stepping up has never taken care of a lot of that stuff.
Exactly.
So that wealth of knowledge left, right?
And they've learned exactly what you taught them, which was nothing.
Right. And I don't think of that. And I think maybe we can poo-poo that a little bit and go wealth of knowledge. Like, I think we take that for granted versus mentoring.
Right.
that wealth, right?
Right.
And
the wealth it's substantial now.
The wealth,
and it's multifaceted as well. And there's so there's also it's one of those topics that people don't like to, at our dinner table, there were certain topics you never raised, right? Religion, politics, and money. And it was funny because we didn't have much religion, we weren't that political, and we had no money. So and maybe that was why we didn't
need to talk about it.
We didn't need to talk about it. But, we learned that. But the reality is that our kids then aren't ready to deal with these issues. And by the time they get to 25 or 30, they've created their own sense of what the wealth of the family is. And wealth sometimes is a proxy for power. So I've been involved with some farm transition situations where people viewed ownership as the prestige in the family and the power. And it wasn't ownership they were after, it was power, and it was the prestige. And those are situations you don't want, because that really muddies the planning. I shouldn't say you don't want that. You want to manage that, because I don't think most people like to plan on that basis. But they weren't taught. They had to learn it on their own, and that's what they took away. And there's TV shows that are entirely based on that as we have a presidency in the U.S.
Oh boy, no politics.
No politics. This is Canada. But that's what it's about. It becomes about perception, and that's what fair versus equal is all about: perception and managing perceptions. So I really do believe that it's hard work. It's something you got to start with at the beginning, and it's a different mindset. I mentioned that we plan mostly for the assets. We don't spend much time preparing the heirs to receive the benefits of our wealth. So that's having meaningful financial conversations, so that they don't think life insurance is a four-letter word, and they don't think working with a lawyer is something that they should be avoided, but that there's a process and that there are times and points where we need to do that, so that if they get married, in advance of that, they have the conversations about marriage contracts and putting shareholder agreements together and papering the relationship. Even though it doesn't feel natural, because that's not what happened in the previous generation, what got you here is not what's going to get your kids to the next level, right? And you've got to do it different.
The crazy thing, I'm sitting here going, that's business. Mm-hmm. It
is a business.
It is a business. Farming is a business, and many do operate that way, and I know a whole heck of a lot that don't.
Yeah.
And in the business world, those are just standard things. You have all your legal agreements in place. You have business meetings. You have business plans.
Yeah.
If somebody's coming in, oh my goodness, you talk about prenups. You talk about all those things.
Right.
But I guess it's a different culture for farming.
It is. It's a different culture, and it's a different culture because it enmeshes family and legacy and what comes with ownership together with a business. It all goes together. It's a big ball of emotion and an opportunity, and that's where that three-circle model or something like that, where you just acknowledge that this business, this entity that we have, it's the sum of many parts. And how do we plan for those different parts? Then how do we put it together again as well? And that's where that three-circle model can really be very helpful, just as a visualization of how we got to deal. This is a family issue, so how do we deal with this? This is a business issue. How do we deal with this? This is an ownership issue. How do we deal with this? And what we consider, who we involve for a family decision may or may not be the same as what we might use for an ownership decision, for example.
Okay.
And once we begin to appreciate that those are different areas of decision making and communication, we start to make better decisions for the entity as a whole.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I veered off a little bit there, but I think this is part and parcel of that bigger subject. And I'm going to go on another little rabbit trail here real quick, but I'm just seeing an opportunity where you shine, where you really know, where we can share with our audience. So again, I know many farmers, grandparents, different individuals over the years that haven't had that access to information that we have now.
Yeah.
And you know what? We can't blame them for some of the decisions because you only know what you know.
Right.
And you can't do better than what you know. But in this generation, there's so much information out there. Google, show like this, papers, everybody, that we can do it a lot better. And when we're talking about this big conversation of wealth, and Chris, I'm taking you here because I know it's in your book, but if I was a young farmer right now, it would be smart if I would go and find that advisor and start early, right?
Yes.
And we're not pushing anything here. This is an association, the Family Enterprise Advisors, right?
Well, that's one example.
That's one example.
One example, yeah.
But finding an advisor, and that's like your business consultant.
Yeah,
and then you start to put in those pieces. And having those pieces, the family, the business, and then the wealth over here.
Yeah.
If we can start doing that, we're going to make sure that the wealth gets transferred and built, and
it makes for better decision making.
Right.
So there's a bias in
Am I on the right track?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. And we want those advisors to be people, and we were going to go here. We want to choose advisors. We want to have an ability and metrics, again, to choose our advisors. So, just because somebody was always your advisor doesn't necessarily, they were your parents' advisor, doesn't mean that needs to be your advisor. It's you want to understand what your values are, what your goals are, the direction you're going to take. You want to be the advocate for your own planning. You need to go out and be able to choose an advisor as opposed to have an advisor that just kind of happens upon you, right? I think you need to be more engaged. And that generation, the next generation in farming right now, they're millennials. They're going to be engaged. They want to do that for sure. So that level of engagement is really, really important. So choosing our advisors is changing as well. Family enterprise advisors are a good place to start, but maybe it's a coach. Maybe it's somebody who will just take your hand and avoid, so there's another bias that we get into. It's called confirmation bias. So if you only listen to CNN, for example, and you never listen to Fox or MSNBC or any other channel, after a while, you begin to believe you're right about your opinions on the world because they're all being confirmed every day. If you're getting your advice on succession planning and transition planning from your family, that's the only source of information you have.
Oh, yeah.
So having a trusted advisor with you that's going to challenge those assumptions, that's going to say, well, just because it was done that way doesn't mean it's the right way for you and for the right direction that you want to take. They have to be prepared to ask really tough questions. They have to be prepared to take you into a conversation that might make you uncomfortable and might make the position that you're beginning to adopt a little oppositional from where the parent generation is or something like that.
Okay.
But that doesn't make it wrong. It just means that it's going to be a lively conversation and maybe everybody's going to learn something from this new way of looking at things. Everything changes, and the way of doing things changes as well. And so, like I said, what got your parents here is not necessarily what's going to get the family where it needs to go with the next into the next 100 years.
It's a very different world now.
It is.
And what happened back then probably shouldn't for the most part, and sometimes can't with the prices of land, and it's a very different world now.
It's very, very different. And,
yeah.
And how we organize ourselves as, in homes and in relationships is different. Not as many people are marrying. A lot of people aren't even getting together at all. Like a lot of people stay single now for much of their lives. That changes your planning. It also changes how those people feel in the family. And we have to be prepared to adapt to that. You alluded to things being some of the things that we have access to. We have access to so much information sometimes. I think it actually paralyzes us sometimes as well. And being able to move through that and sift away what's relevant and what's not relevant and what's noise and what's key is also really helpful. So having a good advisor is critically important.
And that's why I keep on going back there. I'm not selling anything at all here, and I'm just looking out and trying to make it easy for farmers farm families that have so much on their brain, and they know they need to do transition planning. They know they need to take care of their wealth, the estate, all of these things. But goodness, what does half of that mean? And where do you start, right? And having one trusted advisor, and correct me if I'm wrong, this was on our agenda to talk about, but if you get one person, like an advisor that's well-rounded, like an FEA advisor, they're a person that comes in and acts as that advisor, and they have the knowledge and they know all the people in the different professions that it takes,
Absolutely.
right? So again, sometimes even when I'm talking to you guys are so brilliant. I'm sitting here and you guys do an amazing job of communicating it, but sometimes the amount of information is paralyzing, just like you said. So where's that starting point? Bringing in an advisor and they go, okay, what's the goals? You want this, you have these children that don't farm, and then making a plan to make sure that the wealth continues on.
Absolutely.
Versus going, okay, it's going to be in my will, and when I die, they can all figure it out. And guess what? Farm needs to be sold because ... Well, the wealth didn't continue on, the farm didn't continue on.
Because the plan was never really about the beneficiaries. The plan was about the wealth. It was about the financial wealth. You've hit the nail on the head. That when the planning becomes about the family and maximizing their happiness, like why would any farmer want to trap a child into a career or a relationship with the family's wealth that makes them unhappy? They would never want to. Nobody wants to do that.
No.
So if you create a plan that achieves that as an outcome, you've probably failed to plan at the end of the day. And that can be avoided. I guess the moral of all of this is that can be avoided. And it comes from understanding that it is something we want to avoid. And then who do we need to work with to avoid that? And it might be a tax issue, it might be a legal issue, it's going to be usually an amalgamation of all those things put together, and that means we have to find trusted advisors that we're prepared to work with that are maybe, I like to think of it in terms of not just their vertical strength. So, I'm a lawyer, so, the vertical strength is that I went to law school and practiced since 1991, so you get that experience. But there's also a breadth of wisdom that you can pick up as well, and that comes from additional training. So, again, it doesn't have to be a family enterprise advisor, but say you work with someone who's an FEA. If they're a lawyer or an accountant and they come in as an FEA, they're thinking in their vertical, but they are also thinking about this is actually a dynamics issue. They're able to spot the subtle issues that are going on, that if they're not resolved, no amount of high-level technical vertical planning is going to rescue the outcome. It's going to end up in court, people are going to be fighting, and it could end up being disastrous. So the breadth of experience that people bring, and that's where, as an advocate for your own planning, it becomes really, really important for you to sit down and say, here's the table stakes when I'm working with an advisor are their professional capabilities. But I also want bing, bang, bang, and bing. This is important to me. This is a direction I want to spend some time on. Can you help me with that? And if they can't, do they have a network of people they can connect you to that can help you with that? So, I don't profess to know that much about tax planning, but I know lots of great people who have also done the training that I've done, who think like I do, and I know I can make that handoff. So I tend to view my network of connections as the greater self that I am as well. So you want people that are well-rounded in the community as well, and are prepared to slow down the tax planning, for example, to resolve a dynamics issue. And that may mean that it takes time, and that it's an investment into another area of planning that people aren't used to, but we all know has to be done, and that we don't get the other stuff done until that's ready to go, because it'll cause trouble. So in terms of choosing your advisor, you know who you're trusted, and stay with them for sure. But take a look at the needs of the entire system that is your family farm, and make sure those parts are all there. Don't underrepresent areas. Don't let that happen. That happens a lot. It'll be more expensive. It'll take more time. It's going to take more effort. It might be more uncomfortable, but it really is worth it at the end of the day. And it will help make sure that your wealth gets out 100 years, if that's your goal. If it isn't, then
go to Vegas.
Go to Vegas.
Play the slots.
Don't worry about it. Do a will or don't do a will.
Have a good time.
Always do a will.
Okay, that's great. In your opinion, what would be the top mistakes that you see farm families make when it comes to building their wealth, keeping their wealth?
I think the biggest mistake, and it's not just farm families, it's anyone who's planning for intergenerational wealth planning, but we see it in farms a lot. And that is starting with tactics as opposed to a strategy.
Okay.
And a good example of that is just, so here in Ontario, we have a provincial probate tax. Most provinces do. It's 1.5%. A tactic to avoid the 1.5% would be maybe to do a secondary will for your corporation. That's a tactic. And what happens a lot of times is people will do the will, do the second will, and then they wash their hands. And they think they're done. But what they've actually done is they've put the cart in front of the horse. It really should begin further back with goals. What are our objectives? What are the recipes for action we're going to build? Then what are our tactics?
Okay.
So starting at the end, I guess is another way to describe that. Starting at the end instead of starting at the beginning, and not making the effort to understand what our beginning should look like. If you know what your beginning should look like, ultimately you may end up in the same place tactically, but that whole process of traversing that journey is going to provide a lot of value to the outcome. So I would say the single biggest mistake, and another way to frame that is that you view this planning as an event rather than a process.
Okay.
And when you view things as an event, you don't tend to build in supple enough communication. You don't change your communication styles, and you don't tend to have governance in place, so decision making in place that will be able to adapt from mom and dad or dad and mom to mom and dad plus 3 kids and maybe their spouses and maybe adult grandchildren and things like that. You want to be able to build decision making capacity that reflects the new norm, the future norm, and the personalities that are reflected in there as well, right? Because it's not the same people, it's different people.
Totally.
They're all different. Yep. So that, I know that sounded a bit complex, but really when you boil it down, you're really starting with, you're always starting with the end in mind, but tactically, you don't want to start there either. So, and a lot of people go straight to that outcome, and they feel they've done something because we want to feel we've accomplished something, right? I've done my will. I'm done. But there's so much more that we can do with that. Or I've decided who's going to get the farm, but there's so much more that has to go with that as well, right? And we confuse the tactical outcome with the purpose of the planning, and we really should be starting with the purpose, then going to the tactics. So getting the order of operations, I think, is probably the biggest mistake that people make, is getting the order of operations in terms of the decision making and the planning in the right order. And it's tricky. It's a process, actually. It's always evolving because things change. You know, somebody gets divorced, a child has an accident and becomes disabled. There's a death that's not expected, or somebody picks up one day and decides to leave the business. Or it's a process, and people come in and out of the ecosystem at different points. We have to have a process to respond to those ongoing changes. Tactics tend to lock you into a fixed set of facts, whereas process gives us the ability to respond to those changes. So I think that's the single biggest mistake, is looking at it as a fixed point in planning as opposed to a journey. Yeah.
So that would be the biggest. Are there any other common ones, or? Or would
Well,
that be the biggest one that you see and leave it at that?
Well, in farm planning, I think some of the other, I'll call them mistakes, that I saw were assuming everyone understood what the plan was when they didn't.
We all don't read minds?
Yeah, exactly.
I thought everybody read my mind.
I've tried.
Jeez. We're going to get into a male-female conversation right away.
Oh, well.
Women always want men. Anyways, no politics, no...
Yeah, and no jokes about my wife. That's a communication issue.
Yes.
And we don't like to communicate. There are some things that we believe are understood, and everyone gets it, but it hasn't. And so let's take that. Your child, you believe, understands what your goal. That we did this, but this is what we want. But they might have a spouse, and their spouse is the one who is very rightly influencing their decision. They're part of your child's decision-making experience.
Absolutely.
It's not a negative thing, but it's a thing. And so you should probably consider that an opportunity to bring them into the decision-making so that there is clarity. But that takes effort. So I think that's another mistake, is not communicating what our goals are. In terms of practical things, I think having an illiquid estate, I've bumped into a few transition plans where there was no effort made ever to create liquidity, whether that's through creating a separate fund or creating an insurance fund or something like that. Those are tactics.
So you mean everything invested in the farm,
fully
and that's
invested
it?
in the farm.
Okay.
And yet we have planning diversions that may require liquidity. And liquidity is very hard to acquire at the end of your life or at the end of your career as a farmer in a farm. It's much easier to acquire if you start at the beginning with that as something that we need.
Okay.
So again, it's how do you start the journey of your business, but there's different ways to build liquidity, and I've seen some incredibly, some farmers who have acquired land over time, and the idea was that the land was going to provide liquidity. They'd sell it. It wasn't going to be something that they needed to keep. It wasn't necessary to the core farm. So it was just a good
land as an investment.
It's an investment, but they didn't get, if you will, married intellectually to the land, to that land, anyways, as a family asset that had to stay in the family. It was just a currently illiquid asset, but they could liquefy it if they needed to.
Smart.
But again, that's communication, because you also want to share with the family that's maybe getting the farm or interested in operating the farm that these particular assets are there to provide liquidity if the liquidity is needed.
I bought that piece of land so that when we're ready to retire, we can sell that, and that's our retirement.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is.
But that also means
that type of thing.
How you deploy that through. So if you,
I opened up a can of worms.
Well, you did. That's a whole other conversation. But if you buy that 20 years before you plan to retire, and then you fully integrate that into the farm operation, you've defeated your purpose at the end of the day.
Right.
Because now
the farm needs that.
It needs it, and it's not liquid anymore. So again, that is the purpose that we go into the acquisition of these assets for. And how are we going to deploy it through our business and through our family? And it's not a hard problem to solve, but you have to be conscious of it at the beginning, I think.
And don't hire Tracy Burnett for investment advice. Moral of the story.
Well, and I should say, so a lot of farmers, over the years, I haven't met a lot of farmers that have significant RRSPs, right? And that's because there's no need for it. The farm is usually a better place to invest, right? But I would recommend that in the circle of advisors that you begin to build around yourself, look for an investment advisor, because it's another conversation, another way of looking at capital, and it gets you out of that milieu where there's the confirmation of bias of the farm is always going to be your best investment. It's always been our best investment. It'll be your best investment. But it might not be best for you. And it might not be best for the family where it is. So finding a good, trustworthy investment advisor or counselor that can help give you alternative, or at least, an objective analysis of choices that you're making, maybe as you're building liquidity, right? Having somebody there who can give you that fair input and educate you and educate your family is really valuable as well. So,
sorry, I'm smirking about my investment advice.
I just took what you said, and you're absolutely right. We should find an investment advisor.
That's excellent. Do not take my advice. Listen to Chris. Okay, so those are some of the mistakes.
Yep.
Now, you're speaking to Tracy, the farmer.
Yep.
What should I do right now? What are my 4 most important things to do to build 100-year wealth, to build my farm family wealth?
Okay. So the 4th thing, and these are, I put them in a particular order, but they're in no particular order. In reality, it'll always depend. But understand that it won't be easy. So the 4th thing is that this is not going to be easy. It's going to require time. It's going to require treasure. And it might also require going to places. A lot of families have traumas that are baked into their corporate and their family structure. Maybe a father in a previous generation was killed in a car accident, and the family wasn't ready for that, and they had to sell the farm, and they started again. And in the back of their head, that has affected their planning somehow.
Okay.
And we transmit those things into next generations,
Totally.
those experiences, whether we're conscious of that or not, right? It's going to be hard to get around those things. So understand that it won't be easy. And if you can appreciate that it won't be easy, then when an obstacle comes along and slows you down and frustrates you, you're ready for that. You knew that was coming. You didn't know how it was going to come, but you knew that was coming, and you'll keep going because so many people quit when it gets hard. So it's going to be hard. Use values to build conversations between generations, okay? So one of the starting points I deal with in the book is that most planning should start with what are our shared values. And shared values are a great place to understand where in your family everyone agrees. This is what has to happen. This is what cannot happen. And that will tend to eliminate certain tactics as options because they don't support the goals of.
We want the farm to continue on. We absolutely do not want the farm to be sold. Would those be values?
So that is a legacy value inside the assets being legacy. If it also percolates up that we don't want the family to ever, we want to minimize conflict, or we want harmony inside the family, we have to marry those 2 values somehow. We have to appreciate that whatever planning we do, it has to feed the value of harmony, and it also has to feed the value of legacy. And that may mean that just leaving the farm to 2 of the 3 children that are in farming and leaving a smaller amount of cash to a non-farming child, it might achieve one, but it's not going to achieve both.
Yeah.
And it has to achieve both. So how do we achieve both? And if we can't, how do we manage those expectations?
Okay.
And so I think going through the values exercise leads you ultimately to what your family mission statement is going to be. And I think you should spend some time understanding why, as a farm family, you even want to stay together. Why? What is it? And I say that in a positive way. You're asking yourself, why do we want to stay together? And you'll be amazed at the answers you get as you go through that. But understanding why you want to stay together also it helps you appreciate where the opportunities for your planning are, because those are strengths.
Okay.
Let's plan for our strengths. So often planning is based around the weaknesses that we have. It's risk management and the weaknesses. And people don't like to do that, right? That's hard to do. It is. Everyone finds that hard to do. Start with your strengths. Make sure you never lose your strengths. And then start to tackle some of the weaknesses. And the strengths will be the shared core values.
Okay.
Take stock of the goals that you have amongst one another and for the business. So I think I mentioned that. And then and I've alluded to this, the top starting point, I would say, and I tried to do this through all of the interactions that I ever had with clients over the years, and I still try to promote this as much as I can. Be the advocate for your own planning. That's where a lot of the hard work comes from. So if your neighbor's doing this, that has nothing to do with you. Their family dynamics are different, their long-term goals might be different, their capital structure might be different, all of the tactical opportunities that are available to them are different. It's irrelevant. It's a guidepost, it's a story, but that's all it is. You need to be able to advocate for your own planning, which means you need to inform yourself about what it is you want, what it is that's crucially important, and who you're going to need to take you there.
Okay.
And once you start to do that, you begin to choose your advisors more carefully. You receive advice differently, because if you get some advice and you go, that advice that you've just given me, well, technically sound, is actually going to mean my family can't get together at Thanksgiving, you now won't put yourself inadvertently in that situation. You'll be able to advocate for the other goals and the other objectives. So understanding what's important to you is really, really critical. And that was always my goal, was to have people come out of their planning experience as advocates for what was important for them.
Okay.
It makes you a better consumer. It also makes you a better client. Lawyers prefer to work with a client who can sit down with them and say, this is what has to happen, this is what cannot happen. They're super creative. They can find a solution. They're really smart. They can find a solution that will achieve that. But if they don't know that, then they tend to just look at the assets and say, how do we deal with these assets as they are? Make sure you can go in and give them everything they need to know that will make this a success for you, and push for it. Be prepared to push for it. They'll do it for you. Yeah. So I think that would be the number one starting point that I would advocate for people, is to be an agent for their own success as much as they can. Don't be a passive consumer about the services, and that means you've got to educate yourself.
I was going to say, do your research, know what you're talking about. What I've found is professionals are great and they know all their stuff.
It's scary.
But the thing is, we need to have an understanding and know what we want and communicate that, so that they can create the right plan, right? Versus keeping some stuff in our head. They come up with a great plan and it missed this part, right?
Right. If you don't tell them, they don't know. And they might not know. They'll try and ask, but they might not know to ask in that area. So, if they ask you, how are the relations amongst your kids, and you go, they're good.
Everything's always good, isn't it?
It's never horrible. And maybe it isn't horrible. But if you don't say, listen, I'm worried about, Kim and Mark don't get along at Christmas together. It's not just that they're different personalities, but there are jealousies, there are reasons for that are probably our fault as much as their own. They need to know about that, and they need to know the context and the richness of that context, because your life really is a tapestry. It's not just a single strand. It's a tapestry of experiences, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. Some of them are different colors. Angry red and soft blue.
This is great. You're such a good visual scenario guy. I love that.
It is. It is a tapestry, though,
absolutely.
Right? And it's not it is not a monolithic thing. And the lawyers, I'll talk as a lawyer. Ours is a helping profession. We really are trying to help people, but we can only help people if we have all the information. And it's hard sometimes to know what to ask for. So go in as an advocate for your own planning, and you really do advance the conversation quite a bit further. And then the lawyer is happier because they are there to help you. They end up giving you a better technical plan because it's actually serving the interests that you want to have served. Okay. So the more you can do, the more homework you're prepared to invest into, the better outcomes you'll have at the end of the day.
Excellent.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay. Well, those are some really good points. Did that cover the main ones you wanted to
I think
share?
so,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
I think so.
So there was a lot of good information there. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I apologize if I went off on a couple of tangents.
No, you know what? These are the ideas I like bringing to our audience. They're not always easy. That's why I throw myself under the bus and ask those questions.
You ask good questions.
Because really, these are the important things that we need to do as farm families of our generation. Again, I'm really hooked on that concept of our grandparents and great-grandparents. My goodness, they didn't have the tools that we have nowadays.
No.
Our grandparents, even our parents, now with our iPhones and the internet, we have no excuses to repeat some of the same mistakes.
No.
So these are the ideas and conversations I love bringing our audience. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And your audience is blessed that you're prepared to bring that to them, because it really does help them have better outcomes, which is our goal with all of this, is to have outcomes that we hoped we would have, as opposed to, truly unexpected but otherwise avoidable outcomes. And a lot of the negative outcomes are avoidable. And these kinds of conversations and spending time and the topics that you present on your podcasts and on this web series really does help people make better decisions. And that's what it comes down to, making better decisions.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about you, or if they want to get a copy of your book, where can they find it?
This is what it looks like.
Zoom in.
Except no other. It is available in Chapters Indigo stores across Canada. And if you can't find it there, it's also available in an ebook format, so Kobo and Kindle, on Amazon or on the Chapters Indigo website. And you can order it through Amazon as well. So it's I guess that's as close to everywhere as I can say. So, but it is available online and in stores across Canada, and it's $24.95 is the book. If you have questions about anything that came out of here, I'm always happy to. I was
going to ask you that.
It's probably easier if they reach directly to you through the show, and then you can forward those requests on to me if you want.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to say really quick too, where we're saying get informed.
Yeah.
If we're sitting there trying to figure out our wealth planning, reading a book like that would be a great start, right?
I think so.
Get a basis. And again, I think your book is great. I read it and I know you have that experience, and that's why I promote it. But reading and studying and then diving in and finding an advisor to help us along. Right?
Well, and this book is non-technical. It's not intended to be, it's not going to tell you to use this trust with these features to the trust. It's intended to get you to think about what it means to wealth plan for 100 years, for 100 years of wealth, if you want to avoid the destruction of that wealth in 3 generations. I bring in, so we talked about investment advisors, we talked about the bankers, we talked about lawyers, we talked about accountants. I tried to bring in characters, it's a narrative, I tried to bring in characters who come from their perspective and allow you to see how they can work together as a team to help you get to that long-term success goal in your transition planning. So if nothing else from the book, it might demonstrate to you as a reader where some of the starting points can be, who plays different roles in that, and how to manage those roles a little bit. And you don't have to be an expert on trust planning or on tax planning. They're out there. You can hire that skill set, and they're wonderful. But you do need to be an expert on your own family and what's going on inside that family. And that was the idea of the book, was to get people thinking about how critically important it is to think like that it's worthwhile to view my family this way. I am an expert on my own family. And
that's where I popped in really quick, thinking that would be a great starting point for them.
Yeah.
Read a book, learn, get a basis of understanding for that, and then take that next step, right?
Yeah, because there are a lot of resources out there, and the internet's filled with tons of free resources, and your show is a great source of information as well. So, putting it all together is hard, but reading and starting somewhere is the best place. Get started, and don't let it's your wealth, it's your family. It should be easy, actually. It's going to be hard work, but getting started is easy because it matters. It really matters to you, and you know it best, so it shouldn't be hard for you. Yeah.
Perfect. Those are perfect final words of wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us,
My
Chris.
pleasure.
Thank
you for having me. Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll see you this time next year.
Yes, I hope to be here.
Excellent. And thank you guys for joining us on another episode of the Impact Farming Show. See you next week. Bye.
Take care.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.